Integration and merger activity. Is this an active area for consolidation, or is it somewhat fragmented and decentralized? Merger, by definition, is where we combine two firms so they unite or merge into one single firm. Why do firms merge? It might be to reduce transaction costs, where you gain efficiencies in the provision of a product. So if we do a vertical integration where we buy our suppliers, it'll make the transaction costs much more seamless as we go through the manufacturing, getting to the end product. We also may be trying to reap the benefits of economies of scale and scope. If we buy our competitor and we combine our quantities, we would be able perhaps to close a factory or close distribution centers because we're now achieving economies of scale. Or if we have complementary products and by acquiring another company, we pick up other products that go to the same customers that we have. Those would be economies of scope. We may be going right after market power, gaining higher market share so we could exert more control on the price and the quantity sold in the market. Or we might be simply trying to gain better access to the capital markets through a bulked up condition where the company becomes more easily financed. Types of integration: vertical, think of it as a supply chain from the source through the manufacturing to the customer. So vertical integration is in the same value chain. Horizontal, going this way, is across the people that do the same thing. So if Starbucks bought Peet's, right, they're both sellers of coffee to retail and commercial customers. So that would be an example of a horizontal integration. And conglomerate is where, say, Starbucks would buy United Airlines, right? That would be completely different businesses. So they're differentiating their business, moving into different lines of business that have little connection with each other. Conduct using R&D as the measure. This is just a percent of research and development costs as a percent of sales. And we see that pharmaceuticals generally, for the ones that chase new discoveries, very high percents of their revenues are spent in R&D for discovery of new drugs. And on the other end of the spectrum, Kellogg and food, they spend a fairly small percent in R&D. I don't think there's many more innovations in cornflakes, for example. And this is just the difference in the industry. It's not saying Kellogg's is good or bad, or Bristol Myers Squibb is good or bad. It's just that the nature of competition in those industries necessitate a different level of commitment to R&D, innovation, and new product development. Advertisement is another way we could differentiate between the conduct inside industries. In an industry like consumer products, soaps and cosmetics, Procter & Gamble spends 11.7% of their sales in advertising. On the other end of the spectrum, Goodyear Tire and Rubber spends a very small percent, 2.5%, because they're fairly known players in the tire market and they don't need to advertise as much. It's not as hotly contested an industry as consumer products. Performance looks at how are they doing in terms of their markup and their profits, and also what impact they could have on social welfare. The measure we look at here is looking at the Dansby-Willig Performance Index, where the higher this number, the more potential for social good. So it's saying that if the industry were to increase output, would social welfare be greatly changed? So we see in this area that industries such as chemicals, paper, and petroleum have fairly high Dansby-Willig indices. So if they were to increase some of their output, social benefit would be quite substantial compared to, say, textiles. So there are a couple of thinkings about the paradigm we call structure, conduct, and performance. Structure is things like technology, concentration, market. We just covered those. Conduct is how do they compete? Pricing, advertising, R&D. Performance is what is their impact on society if they were to increase output, or are they already somewhat optimized? And the paradigm says, how are these related in terms of characterizing an industry and seeing how the industries behave? The causal view has it that the market structure somehow causes the way that firms behave, and that they can't help it, essentially. And that behavior is in all aspects of profitability, competition, allocation of resources. And therefore, the resource allocation leads to good or bad performances, again, caused by the market structure that is in that industry. The feedback critique is that there's no direct one-way causal link that is causation, that it's more that firms are in the industry and they can affect the industry, as can the inherent nature of the industry affect the firm. This more holistic view is the more common view of economists today. And it leads to some specifics with regard to Porter's five forces and how the different forces interact with each other and cause to impact the behavior and the conduct of the industry itself. For example, when we look at entry, we see that some are specifically determined by the industry itself, the structure, like the economies of scale and the entry costs, but also has some interaction with switching costs with the customers and also government intervention. So each of the bullets within these hopefully familiar categories of the five forces framework show the use of economic terms that we will see. Some we've already seen, and others we'll see within the next few weeks of our course.